May we begin. Blessed is the one who does not walk in step with the wicked, or stand in the way with sinners, or sit in the company of mockers, but whose delight is in the love of the Lord, and who meditates on his law day and night. That person is a tree planted by the stream, which yields its fruit in season, and whose does not, whatever they do, prospers. Not so with the wicked. They are like the sheep, and they are the wind blows. Therefore, nor sinners in the assembly of the righteous, for the Lord watches over the way of the righteous, but the way of the wicked leads to destruction. May God add blessing to the reading of His holy and living word. You may be seated. Let me begin by saying that when I think about this particular text, it's important to point out that Psalm 1 is not the only pattern for Psalms. What else do I remember about that class? There were Psalms of enthronement, Psalms of lament, Psalms of celebration. There's all kinds of Psalms, and they basically are evidence of emotion. Raw, real emotion. Many written by David, but not all. And they are useful in our dealing with our own emotions, highs, lows, good and bad times. But today I want to begin with Psalm 1:1 and talk a little bit about the fact that I am a little bit of a news junkie from the standpoint of I like to keep up with current events. I don't spend an inordinate amount of time on them, and I found a couple of websites that allow me to quickly glance at today's headlines. Okay? Hopefully, none of you keep up hearing those in a negative way, but it's kind of a quick cursory review of what's happening around the world in a hurry. Not all that long ago, one popped up in the, say, top 6. That was an article from the Wall Street Journal. It was not because it was from the Wall Street Journal that it caught my attention. The headline read, "How a Minister's Son Discovered Slamming and Then Disappeared." Now, I am not the technological genius in this building, okay? But I can kind of put enough things together to figure out some of the things that are happening. And this was a scam put together by a young man who stole over $20 million in a phone slamming scheme and then disappeared really quickly from the authorities. The young man's name was Daniel Fletcher. His father was the Reverend John Fletcher, the pastor of Faith Bible Church in Sterling, Virginia. I'm not even sure where Sterling is. I know where Virginia is. But nonetheless, according to his parents, he was a, quote, good kid, end quote. In fact, the story revealed that originally he planned to follow his father into ministry. At age 16, while recuperating from the flu, young Daniel memorized the entire book of James in the New Testament. Now, I'll be honest and say to you, that sounds daunting, and it's certainly a challenge to memorize James is not a real lengthy book. And I could imagine how that could be done, especially if the young man was flat on his back for a while, he had a chance to reach that goal. Later, this young man attended 2 different Bible colleges, one in Maryland and one in California. But somewhere along the way, he apparently made a decision not to continue in the path of which he had been raised. He invented some phony, long-distance phone service companies, and by various forms of fraud, trickery, deceit, he got thousands of people switched over to his accounts, a practice called slamming, and collected lots of money from his unsuspecting victims, as well as from 2 major companies in the phone market, Sprint and AT&T. By the time the U.S. Senate Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations was wise to him and his ways and ready to move against him, he had dropped out of sight, taking his millions with him. I am assuming, because the story didn't go into a lot more in depth, that he is currently living it up in some country that has no extradition agreement with the U.S. So when I think about this man, and I think about maybe other people that you might have known or been in relationship with beyond just casual acquaintance, what are we to believe or say when there is a young man who grew up, and I think it's fair to say, objectively, knowing right from wrong? In this particular case, it appeared that he knew God's intentions for how people should live. And he was himself living a lifestyle early on that affirmed. But then at some point, something went south, you could say, or he made a decision to change and live another way. When looked at from the point of view of the Bible as a whole, especially Psalm 1, 1 through 6, there really are only 2 choices or ways to live. God's way and the other way. I want to invite you for just a brief moment to think about whatever age you are when you, like Topher down here, when you were a child. What did you know or not? I think it's adequate to say that most of us had some pretty clear-cut idea of what was right and what was wrong. And the reason I say that is because most of us grew up in this country with many blessings, some challenges. But we also, at that point, that most of us in here were young, we didn't have the internet. We didn't have all these other things that we could discover, further definitions of good and bad. We couldn't Google it in 1980 or 60. There were challenges growing up, but there was a lot that was less complex. We were basically good kids. We didn't have to ask a lot of questions that were judgmental. We weren't overly concerned about offending someone or some group. We generally knew what it meant to be a good kid. Then we move, if we could, forward. And now, today, we've got infinite number of ways to find out how somebody feels about it. And several social media formats in which people do nothing more than simply sound off about their emotions. I've even heard social media referred to as the modern day songs. But would you agree with me that now that we're adults, we may have to come to accept that right and wrong aren't so crystal clear, or at least clear cut. Why is that? Well, we've convinced ourselves that we've been forced to make choices. Not between good and bad, but between two lousy solutions. Neither one of them good. We've come to understand terms like the lesser of two evils, compromise, ambiguities, no absolutes, gray areas, trade-offs, and moral dilemmas. Given that viewpoint, it may be difficult for us to really hear what Psalm 1 is saying to us. For it presents life in black and white terms, does it not? It indicates that a person is either good and righteous or bad and wicked, with no apparent category in between. That perspective almost seems foreign to us in our world this morning. We're more apt to think that we are all a mixture of good and bad. My personal opinion is that the author of Psalm 1 would not embrace that kind of opinion. However, in the view of the psalm, people are either godly or not. There are no places to sit on the fence. And not only that, but the psalmist maintains that the godly will prosper, while the ungodly will perish. So how do you and I achieve clarity about God's thoughts? Well, one the ways we might attempt achieving that clarity is that we would quit being reluctant to put ourselves in either of these categories. But I think you understand clearly where the song is going. It's saying that there are some moral absolutes in life. That certain things are always right and other things are always wrong. There is a clarity and absoluteness about the laws of God in this life that we are sometimes reluctant to admit. So while we will go there and say that we sometimes recognize moral dilemmas, more often we can stand firm on what is right and what is wrong. It just takes courage. So if that song is truly as simple as a choice, two ways, one right, one wrong, it seems to be endorsed by God, and I would say to you that any wrong way is not. Actually, this is a comprehensive view of the Word of God. Consider some verses specifically. The godly do not take the path that sinners tread. The everybody's doing it argument doesn't cut the ice. The godly do not sit in the seat of scholars. They do not ridicule or mock the attempts of others to do right. Rather, they are encouragers. There's a role we'll sign up for. Verse 2 tells us that godly people embrace. Their delight is in the law of the Lord, and on his law they meditate day and night. So is it fair to assume that for them the Bible, the Ten Commandments, the Golden Rule, they are examples of Jesus and his teaching and our instructions for how to live? The godly delight in these things because they are life. You and I know from someone and from other scripture the simple truth. Now, I'm not going to say this morning or deny that between those who are firmly walking in God's way and those who are clearly wicked, there is not a whole mass of people who seem to be having difficulty finding their place in either camp. But at the same time, I respect the fact that the Bible is clear. When it comes right down to it, our choice is between God's way and some other way which is not his. This means, simply put, that when we make moral choices, we are actually determining something and trajectory of our own lives. There is a broad road that leads to destruction, but there is also a narrow way that leads to life. And I invite you to choose life. May it be so. Amen. We're going to close with a song. We do that not every Sunday that rolls around. This one, in keeping with maybe love and Valentine's theme, is one that you probably know, called Love Divine, All Love